Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about what would happen if you stop eating fat for 30 days. And why would you want to do that? Because we have been told, after all, that fat is really bad for you. After all, they put these labels on food for us, and in bold print up at the top, they warn us about the most dangerous things. So apparently they are calories, total fat, and saturated fat, in that order. And fat has 9 calories per gram, whereas carbohydrates only have 4 calories per gram. So therefore, fat is bad. And in fact, it's more than twice as bad as carbohydrates. How many times have you heard people say that, I can't eat that, it has too many calories. I can't eat that, it has too much fat. Well, if that was true, and if fat was bad, then if you stop it, then you should feel great, right? You should feel absolutely fantastic if you stop the worst thing there is. But in fact, it's quite the opposite. If you cut out fat from your diet for 30 days, you will probably see a worsening in a number of different things, such as your brain function, your mood, your energy, your skin condition, your inflammation, and also probably your hunger and your tissue repair. And the list goes on and on and on. We're going to get into some more detail along the way, but I wanted to start out and get you thinking a little bit. Because why is it, if we cut out fat and all these things get worse, then why is it that fat still has such a bad reputation? So let's get back to basics and talk about every other animal on the planet. What do? Do they diet? Do they count calories? No, they do just fine. They wake up every day and they go out and they try to find as many calories as possible. And of course, calories is just a measurement for how much energy a certain food gives us. So if we find enough food to give us enough energy, then we survive. And the animals that don't find enough, they perish. But it's not only every other animal on the planet. This also was the case for humans prior to the 1900s. So it's basically for 100 years that we think we've had a problem with calories. In fact, before the 1900s, fat was the best kind of food because it was the most energy dense. It was the most nutrient dense. It had the most calories, and therefore it helped us survive. If we selected food that had more calories over food with less calories, you were more likely to survive. So what was it that happened that made us go from searching for calories to avoiding calories? Well, during the 1900s, we saw a dramatic increase in processed foods, in the amount of sugar we consumed, and in the amount of white flour that we consumed. And another really big change was that we saw a reduction in the quality. We went from having eaten natural fats to eating processed artificial fats. And at the same time, we also saw an exponential increase in preservatives, pesticides, food additives, and pollution. And during this time, we went from having been metabolically healthy to get much fatter and much sicker. And for some reason, in the midst of all this, fat got the blame. So let's take a closer look at what really happened. And if we look at plant fats, and here we're talking about added fats. So this is not fat that's naturally occurring in the food, but it's things that we add. And it went from a little over 25 pounds up to about 85 pounds of added fats in this time period, added plant fats. At the same time, we saw a reduction in added animal fats from about 23 pounds per person per year down to about 7. And as dramatic as this change appears, it still doesn't tell us the whole story. Because if we look at what sort of plant fats they used to eat versus what we eat now, in the 1900s, they ate things like olive oil. They ate things like walnut oil, or almond oil, or sesame oil. They did not have hardly any seed oils because they didn't have the technology to extract oil from those. They could only get oil from the things that were very rich in fats that you could just apply a little pressure and out came the oil. So all the oils they consumed were minimally processed. They were very similar to the olive oil that we consume today, which is the least processed oil that we have. And then fast forward to the 2000s, and we have seed oils like rapeseed or canola. We have sunflower and safflower and cottonseed oil. We have soybean oil, and we have corn oil. None of which they were able to extract oil from in the 1900s, in the early 1900s. And the way that they get the oil out of this is through extreme processing. They use very high pressure, they use very high heat, they use chemicals to process and get that oil out. So they change and destroy and basically turn it into a synthetic product in the process. So if we now, instead of looking at this red line where they started in the 1900s, if we look at the type of oil that we eat today, which is highly processed plant oils, there was zero of that in the 1900s, and it accounts for almost all the added fat that we have today. And then, of course, to this picture, we must also add sugar, which around 1800, it was almost zero. In the 1900s, it was about 40 pounds per person per year, and now it's over 100. And not only that, but instead of just sugar, we have made a product called high fructose corn syrup that is sort of the worst of every element of sugar. So now we look at this picture, and then we see what happened to the disease patterns. And we're talking about things like obesity, which is not a disease, but it runs parallel to the problems that we have. We look at type 2 diabetes that over the age of 65 has gone from almost zero to over 25%. Obesity has gone from a few percent, low single digits, up to over 40%. And then another factor, of course, is the amount of processed foods, which, of course, sugar and processed oils are the biggest part of this processed foods, which has gone from low single digits up to about 60% of all the calories that we eat. So this is kind of crazy to me. We see exponential growth in disease patterns. We see exponential growth in the amount of sugar consumed and in the processed plant oils consumed. We see an exponential growth in processed foods overall. We see a dramatic decrease in animal fats, and yet we decide to blame animal fats for this process. And in order to understand more about what happens in the body when we remove fat from the diet, we need to look at the two primary functions of fat. The first is that fat has essential fatty acids. There are essential amino acids in protein, and there are essential fatty acids, meaning we cannot live without them. And these are things like the omega-3s. We get the alpha-linolenic acid from flax oil and a smaller amount from some other seeds. We get EPA and DHA from fish oils, which become part of our body. They were going to go over some of the functions here. And we get the omega-6s, which are also essential and good in moderation when we get them in the right form, in their natural form, which is gamma-linoleic acid and alpha-linoleic acid. So even though we have ALA in two places where they use that abbreviation, these are two different things, alpha-linolenic and alpha-linoleic. And when we talk about this aspect of essential fatty acids, they act as precursors. They act as signaling molecules. And they regulate inflammation, for example. They act as building blocks. So DHA, for example, is the primary fatty building block in your brain. You cannot make a healthy brain without enough of the DHA especially, but also the EPA. And then some of these fats like olive oil that come from natural fats where we haven't processed them to death, they also have some phytonutrients, some plant compounds that can assist us with antioxidant properties and that also have beneficial impact on your bacteria, on your microbiome. in your gut. And the second aspect is that fat acts as fuel. It is the best form of fuel. That's why we store energy as fat on the body. And it's the best fuel because it runs clean and it gives us stable energy. And that stable energy is really, really important because stable long-term energy is like you have a fire and you put a log on the fire and it burns for hours. Whereas if you put crumbled paper on the fire, it burns for a few seconds or a few minutes. And that's more how sugar and carbohydrates work. So carbohydrates give you very short bursts of energy, whereas fat gives you long, sustained energy. And when we talk about the fuel, we're talking about two types of fatty acids primarily. It's oleic acid, which we get in avocados and olive oil. It's called oleic from the name olive, and it's a monounsaturated fatty acid. It means it's perfectly straight except one place where it has a little bend. And then we have saturated fats that come in different lengths that are perfectly straight, that are non-reactive. They don't react with oxygen and heat so much, and that's why they are shelf stable. Unlike a lot of these fatty acids that are very, very complicated and they have multiple kinks and twists and turns, they're very reactive with heat and oxygen. And that's why they're reactive. That's why we can use them in different functions in the body. Whereas these, we just break down and burn for fuel. So the top part, there's very little discussion. Everyone agrees that fish oil, that sardines, salmon, mackerel, all that fat, that stuff is really good for us. That flaxseed, to some extent, those are excellent. But they're confusing the idea that these fats are not for fuel. We don't burn them. You need them in very small amounts, in milligrams or a few grams, for specific functions like we talked about. But when it comes to the fuel, here's where there's some confusion. And these, we need dozens or even hundreds of grams to act as fuel. So let's start off first talking about the consequences of cutting out fats when it comes to these essential fatty acids. And first, we want to recognize the cognitive and the mental effects, that your brain just isn't going to work as well without these fats, because these fats are critical for nerve signals. We need healthy membranes. The cell membranes in your brain is necessary for sending signals, for signal transmission and signal regulation, but also the neurotransmitters, the chemicals that we use between nerve cells to signal, they also depend on these essential fatty acids. So if you don't get enough of these essential fatty acids, you could suffer from brain fog, from poor concentration, you might see some mood swings, and you could also exacerbate if you have any tendency toward anxiety and depression. It could also affect inflammation because these essential fatty acids are precursors to something called eicosanoids. And these are inflammatory regulators. They are signaling molecules that if we have the right balance of fats, we get the right balance of inflammatory responses. So if we have an imbalance of these fats or not enough, then we could see an increase in systemic inflammation, which could affect your immune system and your autoimmune responses and regulation. And two of the most common things that you're going to see with this systemic inflammation would be joint pain, muscle pain, aches everywhere in the body, but also, of course, cardiovascular disease, because the primary cause of cardiovascular disease is chronic low-grade inflammation. You might also see that your skin, hair, and nails don't look so good and healthy anymore. And this is because the lipid barrier of the skin depends on healthy fats. Again, we're talking cell membranes here. So with less essential fatty acids, you might see an increase in dry, flaky skin or even eczema. And you might also see brittle hair and nails because a deficiency or a lack of these essential fatty acids would reduce both the growth and the strength of these tissues. It could affect your recovery and your healing because, again, the essential fatty acids help regulate the inflammatory response, which is tied to your recovery. So in order to regulate tissue repair, you need adequate essential fatty acids and a healthy inflammatory response. So if you have a lack of these fatty acids, you may not recover as quickly, both from injuries and from exercise. There is also the risk, if you don't get enough essential fatty acids, that you don't get the proper development of the brain and the eyes, because both brain tissue and the retina have a very high proportion of the DHA essential fatty acid. So this, of course, becomes the most important in utero when the baby is growing exponentially and their brain is developing very, very quickly. That's why they tell pregnant women that you have to take a DHA supplement, but you really want to take it before you get pregnant so that this baby has some resources from day one. And then, of course, it's super important in growing children, because as long as kids are growing, their brain is also growing. And that brain is not fully mature. It's not fully myelinated until age 25. And then we get to the second part where we're talking about the fatty acids as fuel, where we get the energy from them. And like I mentioned, fat is the richest source of energy, which really we should look upon as a good thing. And it also, like I said, it runs clean and stable. So if we cut back on our fat intake, now we're going to see less energy and we're going to see more energy swings. We're going to see energy swings and mood swings, especially if we don't compensate by eating every 2 hours. So this is what people do when they try to go on a low-fat diet and they start eating a bunch of carbs and a bunch of processed foods. And now you get blood sugar highs, and the body has to lower that blood sugar with insulin. So now it comes crashing down, and then we have to eat again, and it goes up and it comes crashing down. So this is called a blood sugar roller coaster. And it is not normal for humans to have these roller coasters and these swings. We create these swings with quick carbohydrates, with things that raise blood sugar quickly, and with processed foods. And then we get into this vicious cycle where we think we have to eat every couple of hours, and we get into these misconceptions where we say you have to eat carbohydrates in the morning, you have to have snacks, you have to top off your blood sugar or you won't have energy. Those are all myths and misconceptions. If we eat enough fats and we keep our blood sugar stable by avoiding processed foods, then we're going to get clean and stable energy. That's how the body is supposed to work. And if we eat less fat, we might also see some digestive issues. And one thing would be that we get a decrease in cholecystokinin, or CCK. And this is what tells the gallbladder to contract. If we eat fat, that stimulates cholecystokinin. The cholecystokinin tells the gallbladder that we need some emulsifier, some bile. So the CCK makes the gallbladder squeeze and empty the bile from the gallbladder into the intestine. And if that works, then we have a healthy digestion and a healthy gallbladder. But if we cut back dramatically on fat, now we don't get that squeeze and that emptying, so we run the risk of developing gallbladder stones and maybe just some sludge in that gallbladder where it becomes stagnant. And if we don't eat enough fats and we don't release enough bile to digest fats, then we also will not be able to properly absorb the fat-soluble vitamins, the vitamin A, D, E, and K. So now we might become deficient in those vitamins as a result. If we don't eat enough fat, we might also see some hormonal imbalances. So one thing that goes hand in hand with fat is cholesterol. So if we dramatically cut back on our fat, we're also going to consume less cholesterol. And even if the body knows how to produce cholesterol to some degree, we still run the risk of not quite having enough. As a result, we might see a drop in estrogen and testosterone because they are made from cholesterol. And we also may not make as much vitamin D because vitamin D is a hormone. Even though we usually refer to it as a vitamin, it is a hormone and it is made from cholesterol. Eating less fat could also affect your appetite regulation because you might see a decrease in leptin and CCK, the cholecystokinin that we just talked about. Both of these are satiety hormones. They help you feel full. So when you eat the fat, you produce these, and it's a signal that you've had enough. But if you don't eat enough fat and you drop these two, then you probably see an increase in hunger and cravings. So that hormonal effect is one way that you could see an increase in hunger and cravings. And the other one, and the even more important one, is that if you cut back dramatically on fat, you're very likely to start compensating with something else, which would be carbohydrates. And of course, if you start increasing your carbohydrates, you're going to see an increase in blood glucose. You're going to see an increase in these blood sugar swings, the ups and downs that we talked about. And when you have a swing in blood sugar, you'll typically see your energy and your mood start to shifting as well. And here's where the biggest source of hunger and cravings come from. Because when you see your blood sugar start shifting, every time that your blood sugar is dropping a little bit, you're going to have cravings. It's a survival mechanism. When your blood sugar drops, your body is asking for food. So by eating carbohydrates, and especially processed carbohydrates that get in and out very quickly, you're going to be driving this fluctuating, this roller coaster mechanism, and you're going to drive your hunger and cravings. And then on top of that, a lot of these foods, especially the processed foods, are also drugs. They have drug-like addictive qualities. And then I also need to mention about the biome consequences, your microbiome, because these fatty acids, especially the EPA, promotes microbial diversity. So if you're lacking these essential fatty acids, you're going to have less of a diversity. And we're finding now with all the research in the microbiome space that the diversity and the amount of bacteria that you have might be the single most important factor in your health. And some of the fats that you eat are going to provide food for certain bacteria that produce butyrate, which is a short-chain fatty acids that helps maintain integrity of your gut lining. So with less butyrate, you might see a decrease in the gut barrier integrity, which could predispose you and lead to a leaky gut, which we know is a huge problem and associated with autoimmunity and multiple allergies. We also know that bile is one of the things that regulates certain species of bacteria. So with less fat, there's less bile and less regulation, which could predispose you to an overgrowth of certain kinds. And again, if you cut back dramatically on the fat, you'll be tempted to eat more carbohydrates. And it's great if you can eat all leafy greens and non-starchy vegetables, but most people are going to be tempted to start eating a lot of comfort foods and a lot of starchy foods. And now you will tend to shift your microbiome toward the bacteria that like carbs. And when we look at the bacteria that are considered pathogenic, meaning they give rise to disease and problems, they are almost all in that group that loves sugar and starch. So even though we live in a world with a fat phobia, you do not want to stop the fat. What you want to do is you want to stop processed foods. You want to stop the sugar and the seed oil. And if you cut out the processed foods, you've already eliminated most of the sugar and seed oil, unless you just do a lot of baking and cooking at home with these garbage foods. Then you want to reduce your starches. And I don't think you have to cut them out completely, but most people would do well to lower them dramatically. I think some people who are reasonably metabolically healthy could have some rice and some potatoes. But for most people, you want to reduce the starches, the rice, bread, and potatoes. And then gradually you want to incorporate into your lifestyle, as you cut out these processed foods, you want to replace them with whole foods. You want to learn how to buy real food and how to cook real food because it's worth it. And then gradually also work to increase the quality of your foods. I don't think that everyone needs to buy everything organic or grass-fed, but you do the best you can. And I look, for example, at vegetables. I look for the dirty dozen. And anything on the dirty dozen list, meaning that they are pretty much guaranteed to use a lot of pesticides, I don't buy those fruits and vegetables unless they're organic. And I just don't buy them if I can't find the organic. And I understand that not everyone has the means, but work at it piece by piece. Learn how to get the best value and do the best you can for where you are right now. And here's something that might help you get things in perspective a little bit, that in the year 1900, in the United States, we spent over 40% of our disposable income on food. And today, in the year 2024, we spent 11.2%. So relative to our income, we spent almost 4 times as much money on food as we did then. So just imagine that you work to increase this a few percent. Just look through your budget and see what you might be able to cut out. And if you get this up maybe to 15%, just imagine the leap of quality of food that you'll be able to enjoy. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.